What is New York in for? When we talk about Trump-proofing New York City, do you think he sends troops in? Does he cut funding? What's the next lever he pulls?
No, I don't think. I think that's more a Mamdani play into his base. I don't think there needs to be Trump-proof. I think Trump has invested in New York because he has so much personal investments here and personal properties that he wanted, that's why he was weighing in for Cuomo. But, I think that there is a danger for Republicans to kind of dismiss this and say this is about the shutdown, or to say that because Democrats elect a socialist mayor of New York City, or even somebody in Virginia who called for assassination of a political opponent in his family, that this is just a foil for us moving forward. I think that is true. Some of these more radical candidates are a foil, but I think the common thread throughout this was the issue of affordability. And I think a lot of people elected Donald Trump because they were concerned about the inflation they experienced under Biden, and they wanted it solved. And I think that, to your first segment here, this trade policy has continued to make life unaffordable. And I think there has to be a change in policy from the administration on that.
Well, it is pretty remarkable that the same issue involving costs and inflation, Ofirah, the same issue that brought Donald Trump back into the White House, in fact, the same issue that put Zohran Mamdani into City Hall here in New York. Is that a statement on the way President Trump has handled tariffs and the economy? Because the polling shows that he's underwater with the American people on that issue.
I think that lane was totally open to both Abigail and Mike Yheskel last night in their landslide victories that are going to be a lot of momentum for Democrats, because Trump has created this opening on the economy and affordability. He simply has not lived up to his day one promise to lower costs for the American people. And I think last night the American people in Virginia and New Jersey sent a really big message about how they feel about that and who they pin the blame on. And I think it's pretty clear that they feel that Republicans own the pain on this.
Well, there are a lot of questions today, this day after Ofirah, as to what would be the unifying message for Democrats. And maybe it's just as simple as that: bring costs lower, the same issue that dogged Democrats in the last administration. But when you have a Zohran Mamdani, who in many cases has an approach that's being rejected by moderate Democrats, who won last night, how do you rationalize this landscape for your party?
Well, I think costs carried the day. And even before Donald Trump was reelected, Abigail Spanberger launched her campaign for governor and was talking about costs and the economy and affordability. And I think that's a roadmap for Democrats in the midterms in 2026. And clearly there's a lot of momentum here. We at the DGA certainly are going to ride this wave into really putting our campaigns on offense. And I think that'll mean that we're able to run competitively in places that maybe we weren't thinking about before, expanding the map in places like Georgia, like Iowa, maybe even Alaska. I think because we did see last night that the American people are hungry for leaders who are going to take action to deliver for them on the economy. And Democratic governors in particular, I'm biased, as you know, Joe, I think have a real record of delivering for that on the economy. And I think the American people recognize that last night resoundingly.
Well, it's been said, even on this program since we came to air, Marc, that the midterm campaign cycle starts now. So what is the Republican answer to what happened last night?
Well, look, I think Americans look at the state Republicans have the White House, the House, and the Senate.
Yeah.
And so it's less a message on the Democrats. It's more of saying, if you're not fixing this affordability issue, then we're going to make a change. I mean, to the Democrats' campaign message, these same governors were in Congress supporting Biden's massive spending that causes inflation. So it's not like they're really pure on helping to control costs here. But I think that nationally, the American people are going to say, well, which party's in control? And they're going to be an expectation that they lower costs. And I think as long as Republicans in Congress are abdicating their responsibility of who is in charge of tariff policy, then they're going to nationally be blamed for this. So I think over the course of the next year, you may see Republicans begin to break more with the administration on this trade policy and begin to assert some of that control back in their hands.
Ofirah, President Trump says it was the shutdown, the fact that he was not on the ballot, and the shutdown that caused Republicans to lose last evening. Is there any truth to that?
I think the American people were very clear. It was cost. It really was cost, and that they wanted to see leaders who had plans on affordability. Mike Yheskel had a day one state of emergency plan to do something about utility prices, which, talking to voters in New Jersey, that's really on their minds. I talked to somebody who had a utility bill last month of over $1,000. Abigail had plans on healthcare, lowering healthcare costs, energy costs, housing costs. I know that's on the minds of people every single day. And these kitchen table issues have really been a roadmap for success for folks running statewide. And I think that's something replicable for folks in our party who are looking ahead to the midterms next year and are looking for a message, I think, that will really be salient. And I'll just point out, yesterday yesterday, we saw Democratic shifts in almost every county in New Jersey and Virginia.
Yeah.
I think that sends a really big message about how powerful the message that both Abigail and Mike ran on was. And we also overcame historical precedent in New Jersey. I don't want to let that point go unmet. We had Republicans who invested big in those states. They were supposed to be competitive races, and we had landslide victories in both of those states. I think that sends a really big message about how people feel and what kind of leaders they're looking for. And I think Democratic governors in particular have been really able to meet the moment on that.
Well, if the shutdown had an impact anywhere, it had to be Virginia, with the thousands of federal workers who live there and have been furloughed or laid off, depending on the case. But there was also a candidate quality issue, if you ask people. And you live in the Washington area, Mark. You know Virginia politics
resident,
pretty well. You
sure.
get that, and so am I. Look no further than the president's former political advisor, Chris LaCivita. A bad candidate and a bad campaign have consequences. The Virginia governor's race is example number one. Is that true?
Well, look, Chris was formerly the executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia. He knows Virginia well. But I think this is more of a caste blaming, that the administration doesn't want to have responsibilities. They want to push the blame down on
Winsome Earl Sears really never connected, though, did she?
No, I don't think she did, but I think that there were other candidates on the ballot. Like, to me, the more shocking one is to see Jay Jones overcome, I think, a great candidate in Jason Miyares, despite his text change about, killing a political
remarkable result.
So I think that this was less about, how far left or how moderate were you. This was, again, about an issue of people still feeling like there's an affordability issue, and that, I think, was driving the message. I think Republicans need to address that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Marc mentioned Jay Jones. Ofirah, what do you make of this? Does it say more about the strength of Abigail Spanberger that everybody rode the coattails to victory, or was that the check on Trump, as his ads promised, that Virginia wanted?
Well, I think Abigail Spanberger sent a really big message last night and clearly had coattails up and down the ballot. Last night, we saw huge gains in the House of Delegates. I think that's going to mean a lot of progress for folks in Virginia. But I would be remiss if I did not point out, to Mark's point on Winsome Sears, the RGA spent just as much money on electing her as they did Glenn Youngkin. And I think that really does go to show that they thought she was a candidate who could maybe make the difference. And so I think it really is a question of what her focus was. It was not the economy. Time and time again, Abigail was filling that lane, talking about how she was going to lower costs for Virginians, and I think that's why she carried the day pretty resoundingly last night.
Wow. We haven't talked about California yet and Prop 50. You were the legislative affairs director in the first Trump administration. You know what it's like to deal with this season that just opened in Congress. When you start rewriting maps all over the country, how difficult will it be for Republicans to get their arms around new districts and know where to invest?
I've always been a skeptic on this strategy because they're based it on the 24 map and what happened in 24. And when the Democrats put forward an incredibly weak candidate after 4 bad years, there was a lot of people who crossed over and supported Trump, wanting to secure the border and wanting to restore the economy that he had in the first administration. That doesn't mean they're reliable Republican voters. So when you're drawing a map like in Texas, because many Hispanics, I think, were really concerned about what was happening at the border, they then are not necessarily going to say, hey, I'm a reliable Republican voter necessarily in 26. Yeah. And if you're drawing maps based on that, I think there's a lot of concern. And I think you have the other irritation that for other Americans look and say, hey, wait, this is supposed to be done every 10 years. Yes. And so I think that maybe you'll see some backing off of the redistricting in other states.
Interesting. Ofirah, we've got less than a minute left, 30 seconds. It was said on this program more than once that if Gavin Newsom got Prop 50 across the finish line, he'd be the Democratic nominee for president in 28. What do you think?
I think the elections I'm focused on, Joe, are the ones coming up in 2020. But we're obviously really proud of the leadership of Governor Newsom in California. And I would zoom out and say that I think Republicans brought us on this path of redistricting because they know that they've taken on a really deeply unpopular, toxic agenda. And the American people last night sent a really big message about what they think about it.